The stagecoach rattled into Las Cruces, New Mexico territory, on an August afternoon in 1878 when the sun beat down like the hammer of God himself, and Josephine Weston stepped onto the dusty street with legs that trembled from more than just the 2-week journey from Boston. She was 34 years old, which made her feel ancient compared to what she imagined her intended groom would expect, and the letter folded in her reticule had been deliberately vague about her age, just as his letter had been vague about his own circumstances. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and gold, adobe buildings squatting low against the desert landscape, wooden storefronts with false facades attempting to impose some sense of civilization on this wild place. Josephine adjusted her traveling dress, wrinkled and dusty despite her best efforts, and searched the sparse crowd for someone who might be looking for a mail-order bride. She had sold everything she owned back east after her mother's death left her alone in the world, the small inheritance barely enough to cover debts, and a one-way passage west. Marriage to a stranger seemed less frightening than the slow starvation of genteel poverty. A man stood apart from the others, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and hair that showed gray at the temples beneath his worn hat. He held himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his place in the world and made no apologies for it. As their eyes met across the distance, Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she could not name. He walked toward her with an easy gait, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. "Miss Josephine Weston." His voice was deep and measured, with the slight drawl that marked him as a man who had spent years under these endless skies. "Yes." She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "And you are Connor Nash?" "I am." He removed his hat, revealing more of that silver-threaded hair, and she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the weathering of a face that had seen perhaps 40 summers. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was long." Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was better than pretense. "Mr. Nash, I must tell you something before we proceed any further. I am 34 years old. My letter may have led you to believe I was younger." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, but not displeasure. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held steady. "I am 42, he said finally, "and I reckon I should have been clearer in my own correspondence. I inherited my father's ranch 5 years ago after both my parents passed from fever. I have been too busy keeping it running to find a wife through conventional means, and too old to be courting the young girls in town who giggle behind their hands." Relief flooded through Josephine so suddenly her knees felt weak. "Then we have both been less than forthcoming." "Seems so." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Does my age trouble you?" "Does mine trouble you?" "No, madam." This time the smile reached his eyes, and Josephine saw warmth there, a humor that had survived whatever hardships this land had thrown at him. "I think we might do well together, if you are willing to give it a try. I have come a very long way to turn back now." Josephine allowed herself to return his smile. "Though I confess I know very little about being a rancher's wife, and I know very little about being a husband." Connor gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby, a sturdy vehicle that showed signs of careful maintenance. "But I figure we can learn together. The ranch is about an hour's ride. We can be married tomorrow if that suits you, give you time to rest and see what you are getting yourself into." They collected her trunk from the stagecoach, and Connor lifted it into the wagon with an ease that spoke of hard physical labor. He helped her onto the seat with a courtesy that seemed genuine rather than performative. And as they rolled out of Las Cruces toward the open country, Josephine felt the first stirrings of something that might have been hope. The landscape stretched vast and strange around them, mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. The vegetation was nothing like the green abundance of the east, instead offering sparse grasses, stubborn shrubs, and the occasional twisted tree. The sky seemed impossibly large, a dome of blue that made Josephine feel small and exposed. "It takes some getting used to," Connor said, as if reading her thoughts. "The emptiness. But there is beauty here once you learn to see it. Tell me about your ranch." Josephine wanted to hear his voice, to fill the silence with something other than the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip of hooves. "It is called the Double N, after my father's name, Nathan Nash. We run cattle, about 300 head right now, though I am hoping to build that up. There is good water on the property, a creek that runs year-round fed by springs in the hills. The house is adobe, 4 rooms, nothing fancy, but it stays cool in summer and warm enough in winter." He paused, his hands steady on the reins. "I have 2 men who work for me, Mexicans from the valley. Good men, honest. There is a woman who comes twice a week to help with laundry and heavy cleaning, though I suppose that will change now. I can manage a household," Josephine said, wanting to prove her worth. "I kept house for my mother for years. I can cook, sew, manage accounts." "I am sure you can." Connor glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "But that is not why I sent for a wife. I have been alone for 5 years, Miss Weston. I wanted someone to share my life with, not just someone to cook my meals." The honesty of it struck Josephine silent for a moment. She had assumed, as perhaps was natural, that he needed a housekeeper who came with the legal bonds of matrimony. The thought that he might want actual companionship had not fully occurred to her. "I have been alone most of my life," she said quietly. "Even when my mother was alive, I was alone. She was ill for many years and I was her caretaker. Before that, my father died when I was young. I do not know if I will be good at sharing a life, but I would like to try. Then we are agreed." Connor's voice was gentle. "We will both try and see what comes of it." They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Josephine found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He was handsome in a weathered way, his face showing the character that came from living a life outdoors. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, the hands of a working man, but he held them with a gentleness that suggested strength under control. She thought about what it would mean to be married to this man, to share his bed and his table, to build a life in this strange and beautiful place. The thought frightened her less than she expected. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Connor turned the wagon off the main road onto a narrower track. "Not much further now," he said. "Just over this rise." They crested a gentle hill, and Josephine saw the ranch spread below them in the golden afternoon light. The house was indeed adobe, the thick walls painted white, with a roof of wooden shingles and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Corrals and outbuildings clustered nearby, and beyond them, the land rolled away in waves of grass and sage toward the darker line of trees that must mark the creek Connor had mentioned. Cattle grazed in the distance, small shapes moving slowly across the landscape. "It is beautiful," Josephine said, and meant it. There was something solid and real about the place, a sense of permanence that spoke to something deep in her chest. "It is home." Connor drove the wagon down toward the house, and Josephine saw 2 men emerge from the barn, both pausing to watch their approach. "That is Miguel and his son Louis. They have worked for the Double N for 10 years, since before my father died." The men approached as Connor brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Miguel was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and a face weathered to leather by sun and wind. Louis was younger, maybe 25, with his father's strong build and a shy smile. "Miguel Lewis, this is Miss Josephine Weston." Connor set the brake and jumped down, then turned to help Josephine from the wagon. "She will be my wife after we go into town tomorrow to see the Reverend. Senora." Miguel swept off his hat and Lewis did the same. "Welcome to the Double N." "Thank you." Josephine smiled at them, relieved by the genuine warmth in their faces. "I hope we will work well together. Miguel, can you help me get Miss Weston's trunk inside?" Connor was already moving to the back of the wagon. "Lewis, see to the horses if you would." The men moved with the easy efficiency of long practice, and within minutes, Josephine found herself standing in the main room of the house while Connor carried her trunk to one of the back rooms. The interior was simply furnished but clean, with whitewashed walls and dark wooden beams supporting the ceiling. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, while sparse, showed signs of good craftsmanship. Windows on either side of the front door let in the golden evening light. "I put you in the back bedroom," Connor said, emerging from the hallway. "It gets the morning sun, which I thought you might like. I will sleep out here on the sofa tonight so you can have your privacy." "That is very considerate." Josephine felt awkward suddenly, aware that they were alone in the house, that tomorrow they would be married, that the life she had known was truly gone and this strange new one was beginning. "Mr. Nash, I want you to know that I intend to be a good wife to you. I will do my best to make a home here, Connor." He moved closer and she caught the scent of him, leather and sage and clean sweat. "If we are to be married, you should call me Connor, and I believe you, Josephine. May I call you Josephine?" "Yes, or Josie if you prefer." No one had called her Josie since she was a girl, but somehow in this new place it felt right to reclaim that younger self. "Josie." He said it like he was tasting the word. "I like that. Now you must be tired and hungry. Let me see what I can put together for supper. Tomorrow, after we are married, you can take over the kitchen and show me what a proper meal tastes like." She laughed, surprised by the sound. "I doubt my cooking will be much better than yours. I am quite ordinary in the kitchen. Then we will be ordinary together." Connor moved toward the kitchen area, which occupied one corner of the main room. "There is water in the pitcher in your room if you want to wash up. Make yourself at home, Josie. This is your house now as much as it is mine." Josephine retreated to the bedroom, needing a moment to herself to absorb all the changes. The room was small but pleasant, with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand with the promised pitcher and basin. A window looked out over the land toward the mountains, and she stood for a moment watching the light change as the sun sank lower. She had expected to feel more afraid, but instead, she felt a curious sense of rightness. Connor was not what she had imagined when she answered his advertisement. He was older, more weathered, more real somehow than the vague figure she had constructed in her mind. But he was also kind and honest, and there was something in his eyes when he looked at her that made her think he saw not just a housekeeper or a convenience, but a woman, a person. After washing the dust from her face and hands, she changed into a simpler dress and returned to the main room. Connor had laid out a meal of bread, cheese, cold meat, and canned peaches, with coffee that smelled strong enough to strip paint. "Not fancy," he said, gesturing for her to sit at the rough wooden table. "But it will keep you going until tomorrow when you can cook something proper." They ate in companionable silence at first, and then Connor began to talk, telling her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in this dry country, about his plans to dig more wells and improve the herd. Josephine listened and asked questions, and found herself genuinely interested. There was a satisfaction in the way he spoke of his work, a sense of building something that would last. "What about you?" Connor asked finally, pushing his empty plate aside. "What was your life like back east? Small?" Josephine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. My father was a clerk who died when I was 8. My mother remarried, but her second husband was not a kind man. He left her when I was 16, and after that, it was just the two of us. She had a weak heart, grew worse as the years passed. I took in sewing and mending to make ends meet and took care of her. She died last April. I am sorry. Connor's voice was quiet. That is a heavy burden for one person to carry. I did not mind caring for her. Josephine met his eyes. I loved her. But after she was gone, I realized I had no life of my own. No prospects, no family, no future that I could see. When I heard about the opportunities out west, about men looking for wives, I thought perhaps I could start over, be someone new. You do not have to be someone new. Connor reached across the table and took her hand, his palm warm and rough against her skin. Just be yourself. That is enough. The simple acceptance of it brought tears to Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back, not wanting to seem weak. But Connor saw them anyway and squeezed her hand gently before letting go. They talked long into the evening as the light faded and Connor lit oil lamps against the darkness. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the Apache raids that had been common when he was young, but had mostly ceased now that the tribes were being pushed onto reservations. He spoke with regret about that, about the injustice of it, and Josephine appreciated his honesty. She told him about Boston, about the narrow streets and tall buildings, about the smell of the harbor and the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings, about the loneliness of being a woman alone, the way people looked at her with pity or suspicion, the slow dwindling of options as she grew older. Finally, when the moon was high and Josephine could barely keep her eyes open, Connor insisted she go to bed. "Tomorrow will be a long day," he said. "We will ride into town early for the ceremony, and then I thought we could stay for the evening, have a proper meal at the hotel to celebrate. If that appeals to you." "That sounds lovely." Josephine stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "Thank you, Connor, for everything, for being kind." "No thanks needed." He stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other in the lamplight. "Sleep well, Josie." She retreated to the bedroom and closed the door, then sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. Tomorrow she would be married. Tomorrow her life would truly begin. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Morning came with birdsong and the golden light Connor had promised. Josephine woke disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was and why. Her wedding day. She dressed with care in her best gown, a deep blue silk that she had saved for years, and pinned her dark hair up in a style that she hoped looked sophisticated rather than severe. The mirror showed her a woman past her youth, fine lines beginning at the corners of her eyes, but her skin was still good and her figure still trim. She would have to be enough. Connor was already up when she emerged, dressed in what must be his best clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with a string tie, his hair damp from washing. He looked up as she entered and went very still. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They ate a quick breakfast, then Connor went to hitch up the wagon again. Miguel and Louis appeared to see them off, both men grinning and offering congratulations. The ride into Las Cruces passed quickly, Josephine's nerves increasing with each mile. This was really happening. She was really going to marry this man she had known for less than a day. The Reverend was a portly man with kind eyes who asked them only the basic questions required by law before performing a simple ceremony in the small church. Connor produced a plain gold band that had belonged to his mother, and when he slipped it onto Josephine's finger, she felt the weight of it like a promise. "I will do my best by you," Connor said quietly, holding her hand. I know we are starting this backward, but I hope we can build something good together." "I hope so too." Josephine looked into his eyes and saw her own uncertainty reflected back, along with something else: determination, hope. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and Connor leaned down to kiss her, a brief press of lips that sent heat flooding through Josephine's body. When he pulled back, he was smiling, and she found herself smiling in return. They signed the necessary papers and paid the Reverend, then stepped out into the bright morning. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Nash?" Connor asked, offering her his arm. "Strange. Good." Josephine took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him. "How does it feel to be a married man?" "Right." He covered her hand with his. "It feels right." They spent the day in Las Cruces, Connor introducing Josephine to various townspeople as his wife, picking up supplies, and generally making their new status known. Josephine met the other women with a mixture of nervousness and determination, aware of their appraising looks, their curiosity about the mail-order bride who had married Connor Nash. But most were welcoming enough, and by afternoon, Josephine felt she had begun to find her footing. They had dinner at the hotel as promised, a surprisingly good meal of steak and potatoes, and then, as the sun began to set, they headed back to the ranch. Josephine felt her nervousness returning as they drew closer to home. Tonight would be their wedding night. Tonight they would truly become husband and wife. Connor seemed to sense her tension because he reached over and took her hand. "We do not have to rush anything," he said quietly. "I meant what I said about building something together. That includes this part too. I appreciate that." Josephine squeezed his hand. "But I think I would rather we just go forward. Not knowing seems worse than knowing, if that makes sense." "It does." Connor's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I will be gentle, Josie. I promise you that." At the ranch, Connor saw to the horses while Josephine went inside and lit the lamps. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved through the house that was now legally hers, trying to calm the flutter in her chest. She heard Connor come in behind her, the sound of him setting the bolt on the door. "Josie," his voice was soft, "come here." She turned and found him standing in the middle of the main room, his hat set aside, his eyes warm in the lamplight. She walked to him slowly, and when she was close enough, he took her hands. "I know this is strange," he said. "We are strangers in many ways, bound by law but not yet by anything deeper. But I want you to know that I am glad you are here. I think we will be good for each other if we give it time." "I think so too." Josephine looked up at him, at this man who was now her husband, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The beginning. He kissed her then, more deeply than he had in the church, and Josephine let herself lean into him. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt in years. When he picked her up and carried her to his bedroom, to their bedroom now, she did not protest. And when he laid her down on the bed and began to unlace her dress with careful fingers, she helped him, wanting this, wanting the connection it would bring. Their coming together was tender and awkward and sweet, the fumbling of two people learning each other. Connor was patient, attentive to her responses, and while Josephine could not say the earth moved, there was a warmth to it, an intimacy that felt like the beginning of something deeper. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Connor's arm around her, Josephine's head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and the sound of it lulled her towards sleep. "Thank you," Connor said into the darkness, "for taking a chance on me on this. Thank you for the same." Josephine pressed closer, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I think we will be all right, Connor. I truly do. I know we will." He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, wife. Tomorrow we start building our life together." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Josephine with its rightness. She woke each morning to Connor's warmth beside her, rose to make breakfast while he saw to the early chores, spent her days learning the ins and outs of running a ranch household. It was different from anything she had known in Boston, harder in many ways, but also more satisfying. There was a directness to the work, a tangible result to her efforts that she had never felt in her old life. Connor was a patient teacher, showing her how things worked on the ranch, never making her feel stupid for not knowing. He taught her to ride, first on an old gentle mare named Daisy, taking her out into the rangeland so she could see the full scope of their property. He showed her the creek with its clear water running over smooth stones, the line of cottonwood trees that marked its course, the small groves of mesquite, and the wide open spaces where the cattle grazed. Josephine learned the names of the cattle, at least the ones Connor had named, learned to recognize the different grasses and plants, learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the feel of the wind. She learned to make tortillas from Maria, the woman who came to help with the washing and picked up scattered Spanish from Miguel and Luis. The language was beautiful, rolling and musical, and she enjoyed the challenge of learning it. But more than any of that, she learned Connor. She learned that he was quiet in the mornings until he had his coffee, that he hummed tunelessly when he was concentrating on a task, that he read books voraciously whenever he had a spare moment, surprising her with his educated mind. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that crept up on you, that he was scrupulously fair in his dealings with others, that he carried a deep sadness about his parents' deaths that he rarely spoke of, but that she could see in unguarded moments. And Connor learned her. He learned that she was fiercely competent once she understood how to do something, that she had a quick temper that flared hot and died fast, that she loved the early morning hours when the world was still and cool. He learned that she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs from her childhood, that she had a talent for numbers and took over the ranch accounts within a month, that she read poetry when she thought no one was looking. They grew closer, day by day, the awkwardness between them fading as familiarity took its place. Connor began to reach for her hand without thinking, to drop a kiss on her cheek as he passed, to pull her close at night and hold her while they slept. Josephine found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his step, feeling incomplete when he was out on the range for long hours. 3 months after their wedding, as autumn began to paint the cottonwoods gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Josephine realized she loved him. The realization came as she watched him work with a young horse in the corral, patient and firm, his movements economical and sure. He glanced up and caught her watching, and the smile he gave her was so warm, so genuine, that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. She loved him. This man who had taken a chance on a mail-order bride 8 years his senior, who had been kind and patient and real with her from the start, who made her laugh and made her think and made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced. She loved him, and the knowledge of it was both terrifying and wonderful. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, she gathered her courage and said it. "Connor, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" His arm tightened around her, and she heard the concern in his voice. "I love you." The words came out in a rush. "I know we married for practical reasons, and I know it has only been a few months, but I love you. I needed you to know." There was a moment of silence, and Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs. Then Connor rolled to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek in the darkness. "Josie." His voice was thick with emotion. "I love you too. I have been trying to find the courage to say it for weeks now. I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel you had to say it back. But God, Josie, I love you. You have brought life back to this house to me. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came and filled all the empty spaces." She kissed him then, pouring all her feeling into it, and their lovemaking that night was different, deeper, informed by the words they had finally spoken. Afterward, Josephine lay awake for a long time, listening to Connor's breathing deepen into sleep, marveling at the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, she had been alone in Boston, frightened and uncertain. Now she was here, in New Mexico territory, married to a man she loved, building a life that felt real and solid and hers. Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the mountains white. Josephine learned to appreciate the fierce beauty of the land in winter, the way the snow highlighted every rise and fall, the crystalline clarity of the air. She and Connor spent long evenings by the fire, reading together, talking, simply being in each other's company. The physical side of their marriage continued to deepen, the awkwardness long gone, replaced by a knowing of each other's bodies that brought pleasure and connection in equal measure. Spring arrived with a rush of green, wildflowers carpeting the land in waves of color. The cattle began calving, and Connor was often out at all hours helping with difficult births. Josephine learned to help as well, losing her squeamishness in the face of necessity, feeling a fierce pride when a calf she had helped birth staggered to its feet and began to nurse. It was in late spring, as the world burst into life around them, that Josephine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, then another, before allowing herself to hope. When she was fairly certain, she told Connor over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I think I am with child," she said simply. Connor went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully and looked at her with an expression of wonder. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but fairly certain. It has been 2 months now." Josephine twisted her napkin in her lap, suddenly nervous. "I know we have not discussed children. I should have asked before. I am sorry." "Sorry." Connor was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Josie, I am thrilled. A child, our child, I had not dared to hope for it." Relief flooded through her. "You are happy then?" "Happy," he laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I am over the moon. We will need to expand the house, add another bedroom, and you will need to take it easier, not work so hard. God, Josie, a baby." She laughed at his sudden intensity, at the way he was already planning. "I have many months yet before the baby comes. I will not break from a little work." But Connor was adamant about her taking care of herself, and Josephine found herself both amused and touched by his concern. He hired Maria to come more often, took on more of the household tasks himself, fussed over her in ways that would have been annoying if they had not been so clearly born of love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer heat. Josephine felt well, aside from some tiredness in the early months, and she reveled in the changes to her body, the visible proof of the life growing inside her. Connor could not seem to keep his hands off her growing belly, talking to the baby, telling it stories about the ranch it would inherit one day. In August, almost exactly a year after Josephine had first arrived in Las Cruces, she felt the first pains of labor. Connor sent Louis racing into town for the midwife, while he stayed with Josephine, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, being exactly what she needed him to be. The labor was long and hard, as first labors often are, but Josephine drew on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Connor stayed with her throughout, defying convention, and she was grateful for his presence, for the anchor he provided in the storm of pain and effort. Finally, in the quiet hours just before dawn, their son was born. He came into the world squalling, red-faced and perfect, and when the midwife placed him in Josephine's arms, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "A boy," the midwife said, smiling. "A fine, healthy boy." Connor leaned over them both, his face wet with tears he made no effort to hide. "He is beautiful, Josie. You are beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Nathan after Connor's father, and he proved to be a good-natured baby who rarely fussed. Josephine settled into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to being a rancher's wife, learning as she went, making mistakes but persevering. Connor was a devoted father, taking on the night feedings when Nathan was fussy, walking the floor with his son, showing him off to anyone who would look. The years that followed were full and rich. Nathan grew into a bright, active boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Josephine found herself pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Josephine's mother. 2 years later, another boy arrived whom they called Thomas, and their family felt complete. The ranch prospered under Connor's careful management and Josephine's sharp eye for the accounts. They expanded the herd, bought adjoining land when it became available, hired more men to help with the work. The house grew as well, additional rooms added to accommodate their growing family. A proper kitchen built onto the back. A porch expanded so they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. Josephine had been at the double end for 10 years when she stood on that porch one evening, watching her children play in the yard, feeling Connor's arm come around her waist. Nathan was 13 now, already showing signs of the man he would become, patient with his younger siblings, eager to learn all aspects of ranching. Sarah, at 7, was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, keeping them all on their toes. Thomas, at 5, was the quietest of the 3, preferring books and drawing to rough play, and they loved him fiercely for his gentle nature. "You remember the day you arrived?" Connor asked, his voice quiet in her ear. "How terrified you looked stepping off that stage." "I remember." Josephine leaned into him, solid and warm against her back. "I thought I was too old, that I had made a terrible mistake. And now I know it was the best decision I ever made." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she knew as well as her own, weathered now with the passage of years but still dear beyond measure. "You told me that first day we would learn together. I think we have done well, do you not?" "Very well." Connor kissed her forehead, then her lips, a gentle press that still had the power to make her heart flutter. "Age makes us wise together. That is what I said when folks asked about our age difference, remember? I think I was right." "You were right." Josephine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, watching their children play as the sky turned gold and orange and purple. "We are wise together, and happy." "So happy," Connor agreed. "I love you, Josie Nash. Have I told you that today?" "Only twice." She smiled against his shirt, "But I never tire of hearing it." "I love you." He said it again and then again. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Their laughter mingled with the sounds of the children's play, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the eternal whisper of wind across the grasslands. The sun sank toward the mountains, painting the world in shades of fire, and Josephine thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and the courage it had taken to step into the unknown. She thought about the years ahead, about watching her children grow, about growing old with Connor beside her, about the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination. The future stretched before her, uncertain but no longer frightening, because she knew she would face it with this man at her side. The man who had seen her not as too old or too plain or too anything, but simply as herself, and had loved her for it. Nathan called out something to Sarah, and Thomas laughed, a sound of pure childhood joy. Connor's arm tightened around Josephine's waist, and she felt him kiss the top of her head. The moment crystallized, perfect and complete, and Josephine knew she would remember it always. This was happiness. This was home. This was the life she had been meant to find. The years continued to unfold, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Nathan grew into a fine young man who took on more and more responsibility at the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the work and a fairness in dealing with others that reminded Josephine of his father. When he was 20, he married a local girl named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the far side of the property, starting their own family while remaining part of the Double N. Sarah, true to her headstrong nature, shocked them all by announcing at 18 that she wanted to become a teacher. Connor and Josephine supported her ambitions, sending her to the territorial capital for training, and she returned to open a school in Las Cruces, teaching children of all backgrounds, including the Mexican and Apache children that some of the Anglo families tried to exclude. She remained unmarried, declaring she had too much work to do to be bothered with a husband. And while this worried Josephine at first, she came to accept that her daughter had chosen her own path. Thomas, quiet and thoughtful, developed a talent for working with horses that was almost uncanny. He could gentle the wildest bronc, could train a horse to do things that seemed impossible. He took over that aspect of the ranch, breeding and training horses that became sought after throughout the territory. When he was 22, he met and married a widow with 2 young children, taking on fatherhood to the boy and girl with the same patience he showed to his horses. Connor and Josephine watched their children's lives unfold with pride and joy, and turned to each other with renewed appreciation for the partnership they had built. As they aged, Josephine moving into her 50s and Connor his 60s, they found new depths to their relationship. The passion was still there, banked but not extinguished, but it was the companionship that mattered most. The comfort of knowing another person completely, of being known in turn, of sharing a history that was uniquely theirs. On their 20th anniversary, Connor surprised Josephine with a trip to Santa Fe, something they had never done, always too busy with the ranch and the children. They stayed in a hotel, attended the theater, ate in restaurants, and walked the old streets hand in hand like young lovers. On their last night, as they sat on a balcony watching the stars, Connor took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day you arrived, how I saw you step off the stage and thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." "You did not," Josephine laughed. "I was dusty and tired and terrified." "You were beautiful," Connor insisted. "And I thought, here is a woman who has lived a life, who has depth and wisdom in her eyes, who is not a girl playing at being a woman but the real thing. I was so afraid you would take one look at me at the ranch at this hard country and get right back on that stage." "I nearly did," Josephine admitted. "If you had been unkind or dismissive, or if I had sensed you wanted only a servant, I would have left. But you were not. You were real with me from the very beginning. You treated me like a person, not a convenience. How could I do otherwise?" Connor lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You are the best person I know, Josie, the best thing that ever happened to me. I thank God every day that you took a chance on a lonely rancher in the middle of nowhere." "It was not nowhere." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "It was home. It has always been home, from the moment I saw it." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars wheel overhead, secure in the knowledge of their love for each other. 20 years of marriage, of building a life together, of facing hardships and celebrating triumphs, and through it all, the bond between them had only grown stronger. When they returned to the ranch, it was to find Nathan and Elizabeth had news. She was expecting their third child, and they wanted Connor and Josephine to know they intended to name the baby after them. Josephine if it was a girl, Connor if it was a boy. The gesture touched them both deeply. This evidence that they had built not just a life but a legacy, that their love had created ripples that would extend beyond their own existence. The baby was a boy, born healthy and strong, and little Connor Nash II became the apple of his grandparents' eyes. Sarah, watching her brother with his growing family, softened slightly on her stance about marriage, though she continued to insist she was too busy with her school to think about such things. Thomas and his wife welcomed another child, a boy they named Miguel after the ranch foreman who had become like family to them all. Miguel himself was getting older, his son Louis taking on more of the physical work, but he remained a vital part of the Double N. When he finally became too frail to work, Connor and Josephine insisted he remain in his house on the property, and they made sure he wanted for nothing in his final years. His death, when it came, was peaceful, and they mourned him as the friend he had been. Louis stepped fully into his father's role, managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch along with Nathan, freeing Connor to take things easier as he moved through his 60s. Connor's hair had gone completely silver now, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had been worn by years of hard work. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Josephine, if anything, had deepened with time. Josephine herself was in her late 50s, her dark hair shot through with gray that she refused to dye, her face lined in ways that showed a life well lived. She still ran the household, still managed the accounts, still made sure everything ran smoothly. But she also took time to simply sit and watch the land she had come to love, to play with her grandchildren, to savor the peace that came with age and accomplishment. On a spring morning, when Josephine was 58 and Connor 66, they rode out together to the creek as they often did, just the two of them and the horses. It was a ritual they had started years ago, a way to reconnect amid the busyness of ranch life, and they treasured these quiet hours together. They dismounted near the water and sat beneath the cottonwoods, watching the creek flow past, listening to the birds call from the branches overhead. Connor took Josephine's hand, lacing their fingers together, and they sat in the comfortable silence of long familiarity. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked suddenly. "Sending for a mail-order bride instead of marrying someone you knew?" "Never." Connor did not hesitate. "Not once, not for a single moment. Do you regret answering my advertisement?" "Never." Josephine squeezed his hand. "Coming here, marrying you, building this life, it is the only thing I have ever done that felt completely right. Everything before was just waiting. Waiting to find my way here to you." "I used to think I was too old to start a family," Connor said quietly. "After my parents died and I spent those years alone, I thought I had missed my chance, that I would die alone in that house with nothing to show for my life but a herd of cattle. And then you arrived and everything changed. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to build something that would last beyond my own life. You gave me the same." Josephine turned to face him fully. "I was dying in Boston, Connor, maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was disappearing, becoming invisible, fading into nothing. You saw me. You have always seen me. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and knowing. When they pulled apart, Connor rested his forehead against hers. "Age makes us wise together," he said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "That is what I told folks when they gossiped about you being older than expected, about us being too old to start a family. I said age makes us wise together, and we would build a life that reflected that wisdom. You were right." Josephine smiled. "We have been wise together. We have built something beautiful." They stayed by the creek for another hour, talking and dreaming, making plans for the years ahead. Connor wanted to expand the horse breeding program, to build on Thomas's success. Josephine wanted to fund Sarah's school more formally, to make sure it would continue even after Sarah herself was gone. They wanted to see Nathan's children grow, to watch Thomas's stepchildren flourish, to be present for all the milestones and moments that made up a family's life. Most of all, they wanted to continue as they had begun, together, facing whatever came with the strength of their partnership and the depth of their love. The years that followed were good ones. Connor's health remained strong, and Josephine had the energy and vitality of a woman much younger. They took on the role of family elders with grace, offering wisdom when asked, support when needed, but allowing their adult children to live their own lives and make their own choices. Sarah, at 30, finally met someone who captured her interest, a lawyer from Santa Fe who supported her work and shared her passion for education. She married him in a simple ceremony at the ranch, and Josephine cried happy tears to see her independent daughter find love on her own terms. Nathan's children grew, and some of them showed interest in ranching while others looked toward different futures. Connor and Josephine supported them all, understanding that the world was changing, that their grandchildren would have opportunities they themselves had never imagined. Thomas's horse breeding program became renowned throughout the territory and beyond. He trained horses for the cavalry, for wealthy ranchers, for anyone who appreciated quality and skill. His gentle way with animals extended to people as well, and he became known as someone who could mediate disputes, who could find common ground where others saw only conflict. And through it all, Connor and Josephine remained the center around which the family orbited. Their love was the foundation on which everything else was built, and everyone who knew them could see it. The way they looked at each other, the way they moved in tandem after so many years together, the way they still held hands like young sweethearts. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a large celebration at the ranch. It seemed like half the territory turned out, people who had been touched by Connor's fairness, by Josephine's kindness, by the example they set of what a marriage could be. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, children running wild while adults caught up on gossip and news. As the sun set and lanterns were lit against the gathering darkness, Nathan stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us all what it means to build a life together, who proved that love is not about being young and foolish, but about being wise enough to see what matters and brave enough to hold on to it. To Connor and Josephine Nash, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Connor and Josephine stood together, embarrassed but pleased by the attention. Connor pulled Josephine close, kissing her cheek, and she laughed and swatted him playfully. 30 years, she said wonderingly, when they had a moment of relative quiet. "It seems impossible. It seems like yesterday you were helping me down from that wagon, looking at me like you were not sure what you had gotten yourself into." "I knew exactly what I had gotten myself into," Connor corrected. "I had gotten myself the finest woman in the world, and I knew it from the start. The question was whether I could be worthy of her. You have been." Josephine cupped his cheek, feeling the familiar texture of his weathered skin, seeing the love in his eyes that had never dimmed. "You have been worthy every single day. We have been worthy of each other, Connor. That is what made it work." They danced that night, moving slowly among their children and grandchildren, among friends and neighbors, secure in the knowledge of all they had built. The music was sweet. The air was soft with the scent of spring, and the stars overhead were the same stars that had watched over their first awkward days together 3 decades before. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Connor and Josephine stood on their porch and watched the last wagons roll away. The house was quiet now, their children having returned to their own homes, and they were alone together as they had begun. "Come to bed," Connor said, taking her hand. "I am tired and I want to hold my wife." They made their way to their bedroom, the room they had shared for 30 years, and prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of long habit. As they settled together, Connor's arms around Josephine, her head on his chest, she felt a deep contentment settle over her. "Connor," she said into the darkness. "Yes, love, thank you for seeing me, for always seeing me from that very first day." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on an old rancher who did not have the sense to look for someone young and biddable." She laughed softly. "I was never going to be biddable. I know. That is why I love you." They drifted off to sleep, comfortable and content, and the night wrapped around them like a blessing. Outside, the land they had worked and loved stretched away in all directions, testament to their labor and their dreams. Inside, the house they had filled with love and laughter and life held them safe. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing changes and challenges but also joy and satisfaction. Connor began to slow down in his early 70s, his body finally showing the toll of decades of hard physical work. He handed more and more of the ranch management to Nathan and Lewis, content to advise rather than direct, to watch rather than do. Josephine remained vigorous well into her 60s, her mind sharp and her will strong. She continued to manage the household and the accounts, continued to be involved in her grandchildren's lives, continued to be the steady presence at the center of the family. When Connor was 75 and Josephine 67, they knew their time was growing shorter. It was not anything specific, just the general accumulation of years, the sense that they were approaching the end of their journey. They did not speak of it directly, but they both felt it, and they treasured each day with renewed intensity. They made a point of visiting each of their children, spending time at Nathan's house, at Thomas's, traveling to Las Cruces to see Sarah at her school. They made sure everyone knew they were loved, that they were proud, that the family would endure beyond them, and on quiet evenings, they sat together on their porch and watched the sun set, holding hands, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. They remembered the years they had shared, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them through everything. "No regrets," Connor said one evening, his voice soft in the twilight. "No regrets," Josephine agreed. "Only gratitude." Connor lived to see his 78th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. He died peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night, with Josephine beside him as she had been for 40 years. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, and though her heart broke, she was grateful that he had gone gently, without pain or fear. The family mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated the life he had lived, the legacy he had left. Nathan took over the double end completely, running it with the same fairness and wisdom his father had shown. Thomas continued his horse breeding, each animal a tribute to the man who had taught him patience and gentleness. Sarah expanded her school, naming it the Connor Nash Academy for Learning, ensuring her father's name would live on in the education of future generations. Josephine lived on for another 5 years, remaining active and engaged with her family. She spent her days with her grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather, of the life they had built together, of the love that had sustained them. She made sure the family stayed close, that the bonds Connor had helped forge remained strong. On a spring morning much like the one when she had first arrived in Las Cruces all those years ago, Josephine Nash passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 72 years old, and she had lived a full and beautiful life. The family buried her next to Connor on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together and watch over the land they had loved. At her funeral, Nathan spoke words that brought comfort to them all. "My mother used to tell me that coming to New Mexico was the bravest thing she ever did. That stepping off that stage to marry a man she had never met took every ounce of courage she possessed. But she also said it was the best decision she ever made because it brought her to my father, to this land, to the life she was meant to live." He paused, looking out over the gathered family, over the land that stretched away in all directions. "My father once said that age makes us wise together." He was talking about their age difference, about the way people gossiped when a 34-year-old bride married a 42-year-old groom. But I think he meant something deeper than that. I think he meant that time together, years of loving and learning and growing, that is what makes us wise. That is what my parents had. They grew wise together and they left us all the better for it. The family stood together on the hillside, young and old, bound by blood and love, as the wind whispered through the grass and the sun shone down on the land Connor and Josephine had called home. They remembered, and they celebrated, and they carried forward the legacy of two people who had taken a chance on love and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The Double N continued to prosper under Nathan's management, passing eventually to his children and then to theirs. Sarah's school grew and thrived, educating generations of children in the values of fairness, hard work, and compassion that Connor and Josephine had exemplified. Thomas's horses became legendary throughout the West, known for their intelligence, their strength, and their gentle temperament. And always, the story of Connor and Josephine Nash was told and retold, a family legend that inspired each new generation. The story of the mail-order bride who was older than expected, and the mature cowboy who said that age makes us wise together. The story of two people who took a leap of faith and found not just a convenient arrangement, but a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Years became decades, and decades became a century, but the legacy remained. The house on the hillside stood solid and strong, expanded over the years but still recognizable as the place where Connor and Josephine had made their home. The creek still ran clear and cold. The cottonwoods still turned gold in the fall. The cattle still grazed on the grasslands that stretched toward the mountains. And if sometimes, in the quiet of a spring evening, someone standing on the porch thought they heard laughter carried on the wind, or caught a glimpse of two figures walking hand in hand toward the creek, well, perhaps it was just imagination. Or perhaps it was proof that some loves are strong enough to transcend even death, that some bonds endure forever. The story of Connor and Josephine Nash became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of courage, of taking chances, of being willing to risk everything for the possibility of something better. It showed that love has no age limit, that wisdom comes from living fully and honestly, that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. In the town of Las Cruces, people still remembered the mail-order bride who had stepped off the stage more than 100 years ago, uncertain and afraid but brave enough to face the unknown. They remembered the rancher who had seen not her age or her uncertainty, but her strength and her worth. They remembered the life the two of them had built, the family they had raised, the legacy they had left. And when young people asked the old-timers what made Connor and Josephine's marriage so special, what allowed them to build something so strong and lasting, the answer was always the same. They saw each other truly, accepted each other fully, and grew together into something neither could have become alone. Age made them wise together, and that wisdom, combined with courage and love, was enough to build a life worth remembering. The sun set over New Mexico territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, just as it had for generations. The land endured, the family endured, and the memory of two people who had loved each other well endured most of all. It was a simple story in many ways, a common story of marriage and family and building a life. But it was also extraordinary, a reminder that ordinary people, through courage and commitment and love, can create something truly remarkable. Connor and Josephine Nash had done just that. They had taken the raw materials of two lonely lives and forged them into something beautiful. They had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would inspire generations to come. And in the end, that was the greatest achievement of all. Not wealth or fame or power, but the simple, profound accomplishment of loving and being loved in return, of making a difference in the lives of others, of leaving the world a little better than they found it. Their story was complete, their journey finished, but the ripples of their lives continued to spread outward, touching people they would never meet, inspiring choices they would never know about, proving that one brave decision, one leap of faith, one willingness to see beyond convention and fear could change everything. And so the story ends where it began, with courage and hope and the eternal human capacity for love. It ends with the knowledge that Connor and Josephine Nash lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something that would endure long after they were gone. It ends, as all good stories should, with the satisfaction of a life well lived and a love well earned. They had taken the gift of time they were given and used it wisely, growing together into something neither could have imagined on that hot August day in 1878, when a 34-year-old woman stepped off a stage and into the arms of her destiny.